rise. If you could all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like the record to reflect that I brought a suit jacket with me and then promptly left it in the car, so I apologize for that. With that note, if we could get started with public comment. What we're going to do is public comment, have a presentation by Ms. Holt again with a couple of different options for us. She's prepared 3 different options for us to review, and then we'll come back and do public comment. As with last time, it's my intention that this would be a little bit more freewheeling than regular Board of Commissioners meetings, by which I mean with the exception that I want to make sure that everybody does use a microphone, whether it's the one in the front or this sort of roving microphone. I'd like there to be an opportunity to ask questions and get answers to the extent that we have them. But beyond that, we'll have a presentation by Ms. Holt, some additional public comment, final public comment at the end, and then we'll be done. So that being said, do we have any public comment?
Now, which mic? Is this mic going to work for me?
It should, yes. Please
Okay.
speak right into it.
Well, good evening. My name is Jillian Norris Santo. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Radnor Township. First, I want to thank this committee and the Board of Commissioners for holding this series of public meetings and for engaging the services of an expert consultant, Ms. Holt. Making the redistricting project a process open to public ideas and concerns is exactly what we in the League have been advocating for years, so thank you. We have further suggestions and questions to put to the committee this evening. Not too many, I hope. The first question concerns the effect of the new Pennsylvania Legislative District 168. Now that we have our own district, can the redistricting process ignore the old lines necessitated by splitting the township between legislative districts in the past? Number 2.
I'm going to pause you for one moment.
Yes.
I know I said this was going to be a little bit more freewheeling. Ms. Holt, do you understand the question?
Are you asking about how it pertains to the wards?
Right. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. I'm asking, I don't know.
Right now?
Yeah, and we can try this again, see if this works.
Okay.
So I think that you understood this, but let me make sure that I understand your question. In the past, there were multiple state congressional districts which went through Radnor Township, and as a result, the word lines that we drew were directly relevant to who your state representative was. And your question is, will that still be the case?
Yes.
Yeah, there's more flexibility now that you're all in one district. When you aren't and you're split up, whether it's in a state house district or congressional district, you have to account for those things in drawing the ward district boundaries. But because you're in one, that is not an issue this time around.
Oh, not an issue, so it's just one big area that you can look at?
To ask the question a little bit different, could you use the mic? We're getting feedback from the back that you should use the microphone,
Right.
but I'm going to see if I can rephrase the question a little bit different way. As I understand it, the only election that these word lines will influence is the Radnor Township Board of Commissioners. Is that correct? I'm seeing a nod from Ms. Holt, and she's the subject matter expert.
Okay. Thank you. Very good. Number 2, will there be an analysis of evolving or changing communities, and will like communities, those that have changed perhaps in demographics, be kept together as much as is practical? The third question.
Let me pause you for a
Yeah.
second. You ask your question, I'm going to try and get you an answer.
Okay.
Ms. Holt, my understanding is that your expertise is not going to extend to necessarily knowing where our communities are, because that's a term that does not have a precise definition. As a result, the analysis that's being done with respect to communities is being done right here by the 3 of us up at the dais, and by all of you sitting in the room, and by anyone who writes in. Am I getting that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. I understand. Now, number 3, will you look at polling place potential? or the lack of a polling place potential as lines are redrawn. That's a factor.
So my understanding is that we are not the people who ultimately decide where polling places are. You asked the question specifically polling place potential. I don't think, Ms. Holt, you've said that that's something that you have considered. However, the areas that we are looking at for precincts are large enough that it would be surprising to me if there were literally nowhere in each precinct where there was a polling place.
Well,
Is that
yes,
fair to say, Ms.
that's
Holt?
what I'm asking, and of course, convenient polling places, reasonably, accessible and convenient. But I realize that is not your decision to make. Another question is...
Let me pause you for one moment. Ms. Holt seemed like she had a comment.
Yeah, so in our last meeting when goals were set, it was mentioned that, people are familiar with their polling places, so to the extent possible in drawing new boundaries, that the polling place would remain within its district if possible. I think that was a lower tier goal, but it was mentioned as something that was worth noting. So as these options were drawn, I did note where polling place locations currently are at.
Right, thank you, so that people would have the benefit of familiar places in their polling locations. And another question that comes to mind is, would school boundaries make a difference? Would school boundaries be a factor?
No.
No, okay.
That one I can answer. That's easy. And I should also clarify, I was specifically asked by the school district. I sent an email in the past saying that we were dealing with redistricting, and apparently the school district got many questions from people who were confused about that, thinking that we were perhaps districting their students into other schools. We have absolutely no control over where the school district puts students. We are exclusively dealing with ward lines for electing, in this case, the Board of Commissioners. Has nothing to do with where your children go to school.
Right, and then another question, of course, deals more with communities, and I guess that's outside the purview of the process. Would the new ward lines be protective of diversity? And I guess in that you've talked about community, that's something for the community rather than this committee to tackle. Is that right?
So the maps that have been drawn by Ms. Holt include a lot of data about different kinds of diversity, and I think we're probably going to hear about some of that from her. Whether you view them as protective of the specific diversities that you are looking for is obviously going to be a question for each individual person. But I'm going to reserve that for Ms. Holt, and I imagine we're going to hear at least a little bit about that as the presentation progresses.
Thank you. And a final thought or question concerns, of course, the college and university dormitories, and we know that you are considering the college and university dormitories because it has been such a difficult issue in redistricting. Okay. Would you also, you are considering, we know that you're considering the college and university dormitories and their populations. Will you also recommend that each college or university have a polling place on campus? I don't know if this is anything you can recommend, but students rarely have cars or convenient transportation to polling places, so if there were a polling place on each campus, it would facilitate voting by those who are registered and qualified to vote. That's the end of my questions, and we look forward to the next steps in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. For the sake of completeness, I will say I have no objection to that recommendation. Ultimately, we're not the body that makes it, though.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. I paid very close attention the last time when Radnor was redistricted. And the issue came up at your last meeting of what do you do about, specifically was Villanova, but it could be Carini or Eastern. And why were Villanova students in 4 different districts? That was an intentional decision by at least 2 of the people who were on the committee, John Nagel and Bill Spinkler. So that is something I've been thinking about because I remember that they did this. Subsequent to your first meeting, I was going to Giant and John Nagel was leaving Giant. And we are not friends, but we're acquaintances. And we stopped and talked. and John had a few opinions. The issue with the students, if you put them all in one ward, you lopside a ward severely. And having participated heavily in the first Obama campaign, where what I did was try to straighten out Villanova students who had registered to vote. At that time, 10 years ago, you had to register for the address of your dormitory, and most of them had put their post office box in. So we had to go back to each one of them and say, no, we don't care what your post office box is. You have to tell us which dorm you are living in. The issue is that can change every year. And in their fourth year, many of them live off campus. Seeing it from the other side, I used to work the polls at every election in 7-1. And the rolls were a nightmare. The kids didn't know where to go. They thought they went where they had voted last year, but they changed dorms, so they changed a different ward because they were 2, 3, 4, and 7. And so I'm hoping that this time there can be some sort of a better balance. We have Villanova, Cabrini, Eastern, and I don't know how much of Valley Forge Military Academy is left with students. And the other issue that I remembered is the census is where are you living on the 1st of April, in this case 2020. The 1st of April in 2020, the kids had all been sent home because we had COVID. Do we have a clue where they even registered? Are they going to be registering it? I don't know that I have an answer for this, but it's something I've been thinking about quite a bit. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much, commissioners, for having this meeting tonight, for holding the second of the redistricting working committees. I'm Hallie Ammons. I'm the Assistant Director for Government and Community Relations at Villanova University. Felt like it was a good time to come up and maybe address some of the questions that have been asked. And with me tonight is Caroline Levine. She's the former student body president of Villanova University and a current graduate student at Villanova University. So I will try not to speak quite so much, and I'll let Caroline also speak a little bit about her experience as a student registering to vote. I guess to start, the way that our students are currently registering, and I have our instructions here, and I have a sample of a voter registration form so that folks can see. The way that they're currently directed to register to vote.
May I pause you for one moment?
Sure, of course.
Or do we have somebody who is in the booth who's able to turn that on for us?
Oh, great.
Phenomenal, thank you.
Might need to zoom in. Okay, so these are...
I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know how this whole system works, but I know that it's basically magic. And
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for it.
So this is from a university website from our Let's Vote Nova initiative, which is Caroline Levine driven. In 2019, am I correct? So it was student-led initiative created to get students registered, to get students educated on how to register and how to vote. It's a nonpartisan civic engagement initiative. And so this is how we are currently directing students to register. On the form, I'll move this over. You can see it asks for their address. All students use 800 Lancaster Avenue. And then where it says apartment, you put your residence hall name. So I've used Hovnanian Hall. You put whatever residence hall name you're living in. That's what they put there, and they fill out the rest as directed. In line 6, they are then using their mailing address, which there are 3 different ones for residence halls on campus. There's 862 Lancaster, 800 Lancaster, or 250 Spring Mill Road. Then their city, their state, and they also need to include their VU box number. So that is how we are currently registering. Students are currently directed to register to vote. So they're using a single address at 800 Lancaster, their residence hall, their mailing address, and their post office box their VU box number. Because we are in 4 wards, these things can change. These things do change. It is not the most intuitive process for students. It takes a lot of education. And it certainly can be a hurdle for folks wanting to participate, or folks thinking they are registered at one polling place, finding out they are not, et cetera. I might actually turn over to Caroline a little bit to let her speak to the student experience.
Thanks, Hallie. So like Hallie said, I am a Villanova grad. I graduated in May and have started my master's in public administration at Villanova. So I'm very happy to still be there. But as an undergraduate and serving as the student body president, I really saw a need on our campus to have a more focused and kind of comprehensive voter registration and just civic engagement effort for our students to participate in. And this really came from my own experiences just starting at Villanova and trying to vote. I'm from Hopewell Township, New Jersey, so not too far from here, but I entered Villanova in fall 2018. So taking us back, that was a midterm year, obviously. I had just turned 18, so I was very excited to vote for the first time. And I followed the instructions, on the Pennsylvania website, had to do this whole thing with figuring out how to label my dorm and everything like that. And then I just found that it was really hard to, one thing that our students face in Pennsylvania with voting is that if they don't have a Pennsylvania driver's license, which obviously our students from out of the state don't have, they have to submit another signature with their form. So that's kind of a minute detail, but it basically means that you have to go back and forth a little bit with the county office. Like, you fill out a form and send it to them. They send you another form that you have to sign and send back. And with just the different voting addresses and then our mail process on campus, I found that it was kind of hard and confusing. And I was someone who was really passionate about voting. I did voter registration drives at my high school because it's something I was excited about for my peers. And I kind of felt like if I'm investing time into looking this up and asking questions on campus, I feel like the rest of the student body is probably also having some difficulties with this. And then my sophomore year, so in 2019, going again to vote, just finding out that even though I had just moved, across the street on campus, I had to completely re-register because I was now in a new ward, had a different polling location, everything like that. Just really felt like a barrier to voting and something that, again, it was just another extra step to try to vote on our campus. And that it was around that time that we started some of the this idea of Let's Vote Nova. So I really wanted to see something that was coming, was student-led, but also had kind of the backing of the university. And I've been really fortunate that, the Villanova itself was really interested in supporting students in this way. And we worked, most of the main work that Let's Vote Nova does, and it's something that is still on our campus now. We have a lot of students engaged in it as volunteers. Is just this education piece. So just literally we went to every varsity team on campus. We went to all different student organizations. We had RAs host info sessions in their residence halls for their students, and just trying to figure out, making sure people knew, we had to walk them through what Hallie just walked you through about where you put your hall, and also the fact that you need to re-register every year. And we did just see so much interest from students in participating in this process. Other ways we tried to make it easier for them were, trying to provide stamps and just helping them figure out how to send the mail, and then also doing shuttles to the polls on Election Day. So I think that just to give you a little more insight into how students experience voting on campus, which, I'm guessing is similar from some of the other universities and colleges in the township as well, is that, again, unless you are literally staying in the exact same housing assignment, which I think only 20 or so students do every year, you have to completely re-register. So that's all 4 years having to re-register, and just adds a lot of difficulties in figuring that out. And did you remember to re-register this year? Do you need to go back and do it? Everything like that. And then it's also just really difficult to have the 4 different polling locations because, first of all, we have to, we can't just say, oh, go to your polling location here. We have to stop a student, ask them, what building are you in? When was the last time you registered? Figure all of this stuff out. And then none of them are walkable from campus right now. And more than half of our students don't have cars on campus. So that's definitely, a struggle to figure out, do you Uber to your camp, your polling place? Can you get a friend to do it? All these different things, but just another barrier for students. And then I also find that students are just really intimidated by the voting process. For most of them, it's their first time voting, or their first time voting in a midterm, or their first time voting in a presidential election. And having all of this to sort out definitely doesn't help in that area. And just wanted to end with why I think it's important that we support our students as voters. Mainly, I think that if you are voting in college and voting in your first few elections, you're just that much more likely to become a lifelong voter. And then I also think that when students are voting locally and participating, they're going to feel more part of the Radnor Township Committee and want to be more engaged, not the Radnor Township Committee, the Radnor Township community. They're going to want to be engaged with it and just be more of a part of our local community. And the students that I represented were passionate about so many different issues. They wanted to be involved, and they were just really frustrated by the barriers that they faced. So I'd love to see, the committee and just through this process, kind of think about how we can really help students get to the polls and vote. Thank you.
In presidential and midterms and municipal elections.
Yes.
That third one is important. Awesome. Let me ask you a question while you're here. And Hallie, same to you. You got an email from me earlier today. You have on campus, based on the information that you provided to us a little bit earlier, thank you very much for that, about 5,200 students. Our mean ward size is about 4,700 people, which means that your on-campus body is already larger than our average ward size. What do we do about that?
So that's a great question. With the census data and the way that my colleagues had it, when we discussed this, the population of the campus is really a snapshot in time. It does go up. It does fluctuate a little bit. There are students who are studying abroad. There are students who are taking leaves of absence. There are students who are special needs students who they are in singles and rather than doubles. So the census data is a snapshot in time.
But you're never going to lose so many students that you're not going to be a wildly large percentage of any particular ward that you flip into.
True. I mean, that 5,200 number is generally where it hovers. It doesn't wildly swing much higher, but correct, it's not going to wildly swing very low. That's largely where it hovers. To your point about the questions earlier about the mail rooms, and I know this was a question that was asked at the last committee meeting, we did speak with the folks who handle that. There is just a logistical hurdle there that I don't know that the university can overcome with having folks registering at one mail room. That's just the way it just is just not physically possible for them to have them do that. So that, based on my understanding of what the conversation was, just not a logistical possibility. Now, there's also the other part of this is that a lot of our students don't, they may be registering out of state. They're not all going to be voting at once. Just like any other part of the district, the entire ward doesn't vote at the same time, or not all registered to vote. It would be similar. I would say, whatever the rates of participation are in any given ward, you might see similar rates of voter registration and participation in a Villanova ward, let's say. So I would say it's probably comparable in that way. But I'm not a mapping consultant, so I feel like that might be I would maybe address that question to an expert.
Is there any mechanism by which Villanova could ensure that students, so let's say we reduced it from 4 to 2.
Okay.
I will sort of preview, but to say that I don't think that we have a mechanism by which we can fit all of Villanova into a single ward based on the maps that we have seen so far. Is there a mechanism by which Villanova would be able to and have the appetite to keep students not necessarily in the same dorm, but in the same ward going forward?
That's a good question. In terms of just if you move into one ward, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. If you move into, let's say it's Ward 2 your first year, you don't move out of Ward 2 until you move off of campus, is that correct?
Yeah, all other things being equal, I'm sure that there will be reasons that militate against that for individual students, but the default would be you stay in Ward 2.
I mean, and Caroline, you correct me if I'm wrong. The students most of the time based on their year in school move, so South Campus is mostly first-year students, correct? And then a lot of those students move to West Campus or Main Campus for their second year, which is they're moving across Lancaster, they're moving into another ward. And then upperclassmen who are staying on campus are largely moving to the Commons. So they're moving back. Based on my understanding of how that works, it might require the university to change the way that where students live and the buildings that they're living in. That might be, am I understanding that correct?
You're understanding me
Okay,
correctly, but
okay.
you're not going to make that change in order to vote for a township level election. And this is the only thing that we're talking about at this
Right,
point. We have a
right.
single ward for state representative, state senator,
Right.
U.S. representative, everything, so.
Right. So that, not being the residence life director, I'm anticipating that might be an obstacle there.
Okay. Okay.
But go ahead.
Okay. You mentioned there were 3 mailrooms.
Correct.
Is there a way to distribute amongst the 3 mailrooms? Like you said, it would be a logistical nightmare to put them all into 800 or whatever,
Right.
into one. But could they be grouped per where they get their mail?
I mean, how, you want to speak to the mailroom? Because you were a
Right.
student using the mailroom.
Yeah, so I think that would, simplify perhaps like parts of the registration process to be able to say to all of our students who live on West Campus, which they're a group that all share one mailroom, to say you can all use this. But I think that still doesn't get over the main hurdle of as you move across campus, you're still going to need to re-register. And we find that, if students' mail is delivered to the wrong mailroom, like if they have an update or whatever, it does eventually get to them, but it's a delay because our mail services has to realize that it's in the wrong place, obviously, like manually look up where that student now lives, figure out how to forward it. So I think it still has a lot of obstacles in that. I'm not sure if it helps.
Happy to answer any questions.
I'm sure we'll have more later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Roberta Winters, past president of the League of Women Voters. And just as Ms. Jillian Norris-Santo has said, we've been involved in gerrymandering and redistricting at the state, local, and national level for a long time. And we know that this is a process that happens every 10 years, and it reflects the census results, in this case in 2020, which was not the best year. One of the things that probably you're going to become familiar with, and I'll put this back on the table here if he wants to blow it up, is that when you look at those census numbers, they're done in something that I know Amanda understands, which is census blocks. And they're drawn for purposes of counting the residents, whether they be at Villanova or in Jake's ward. And they're smaller geographical areas for which the Bureau of Census collects and tabulates all the data. They're formed by streets, roads, railroads, streams, and other bodies of waters, other visible, physical, and cultural features, and the legal boundaries as shown on the Census Bureau maps. So that's very complicated. So when you look at things like census blocks and where lines are drawn, you'll see things like the P&W line might separate Garrett Hill into 2 different precincts, even though it's in the same ward. So it can get to be a little complicated. But those census blocks, Ms. Holt can do nothing about. You can do nothing about. So sometimes they go right down and divide a street down the middle. And I know Jake has some in his neighborhood where right down the middle of the road, one's in one ward or precinct and one's in another. Now I think I'll put this one up. You're probably also familiar that under there are state legislative redistricting requirements, which I believe the township also needs to be aware of, because under our Constitution, it states that all districts shall be composed of a compact and contiguous territory, as nearly equal in population as practicable. And unless absolutely necessary, no county, city, incorporated town, borough, and township award shall be divided. Well, we know that's not been the case in Radnor's past, and even Villanova was divided into 2 different legislative districts for Pennsylvania under the previous maps. Now, within the, we also have rules for local municipalities, and that again states that within a year of the official census report, each municipality having a governing body not entirely elected at large shall be reapportioned by its governing body, that means you, or shall otherwise be provided by a uniform law into districts which shall be composed of compact and contiguous territory as nearly equal in population as practicable. So again, it just follows from the top down. Now, I know you're probably familiar with the current map, and I know one of the things you were concerned about is not making considerable changes. This is the previous map prior to the one in which we're now operating. And you can see, if Jake looks at his ward, there were big changes in Ward 6 and Ward 3 during that time. And you can see Villanova is still chopped up, and there are pieces given and taken in that last redistricting effort. And we all seem to survive, but I think what we need to do is to do the right thing, and compact and contiguous, for those people who don't know, and I'm sure Amanda can explain it better than I can, is you look at the 7th ward, that looks pretty compact and contiguous. You know, it's nice put together, and the boundaries are kind of nice and straight. On this map, the 3rd ward does not look quite as contiguous. It's kind of spread out and has little pieces sticking in and out. So you try to make them look as nice as you can and as smooth as you can without pieces flying over the edge. That's not as compact. And contiguous would be if, you know, there's one of the yellow spots in the middle of the brown spot. They're not connected. So I know you're going to do a great job. We're looking forward to good results. And I know Ms. Holt will do a great job for us. Thank you.
Hi, it's John Child, 308 Rockingham Road in Garrett Hill. Whatever you figure out, I mean, I'm new to this whole precinct strategy thing, where the hardest thing I had to find out is where is the precinct line? You know, half of Aldwin is in 7-2, and then across the street, I'm thinking whatever you come up with, if you could figure out a way to make it in like a PDF link or something on the website so we could go in and see exactly where these salamandered characters, not salamandered, I mean, you know, you got, 6-acre estates out on the west end, and then you've got Garrett Hill where everybody's on 2/10 of an acre or less than that. So I get why it has to be so oddly drawn. But once it's figured out, if you could make a link to it so we could zoom in and see it, that's thank you.
Seeing, I think, no additional public comment, Ms. Holt, you're up.
I sent you all a proposal with 3 different options based on the goals we talked about last time. And I'll just kind of review those a little bit. We were talking about trying to make the fewest changes as possible to the existing district boundaries, wanting to unify student housing into one district where possible, and then there were instances where residential streets were divided and people would rather see those together and use more main arteries to divide wards, and also trying to be cognizant of polling place locations. And so taking all of those things into account and those sometimes competing priorities, I found that it was possible, and I don't know if they want to get this up on the screen or not, but there were some common features that came out with each of the options, particularly in the Ward 4 and 7 area, and I highlighted those on page 2 of what I had sent.
So let me just pause you for one moment because I do want to get this on the screen. Ian, could we get those up if possible? I said magic before. There we go.
There we go. There you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So a lot of them had in common that each of the options has these things in common, I should say, that Sprout Road is the new boundary of 4, which extends up into Ward 3. Ward 4 had been underpopulated. There was a neighborhood here that was kind of cut off from the rest, and that used to be in Ward 7, it's now in Ward 4, and then part of Villanova University's South Campus here had been in Ward 4 with some student housing and was put together with the rest of South Campus housing. So those were some common features between the different map options that you'll see. And because of some changes they made to census blocks between 2010 and now, a little tiny piece of Villanova University is here, but I have not really accounted for that. It didn't appear to include any student housing, so I just wanted to note that when I talk about the number of campuses that Villanova's on in these options, I'm not really counting that one little small piece. So other common features that you'll see between the options are that the boundaries of Ward 5 and 6 do not change. They were noted in the assessment as being within the proper population boundaries, and so did not need to be changed. The proposed Ward 4 boundaries are the same in each option, even though they were modified as mentioned on the previous slide, if you will. And then the proposed Ward 7 boundaries are nearly the same in each option. There was a small modification made on one. So really, the focal point as you're comparing these different options, you're going to see them in Wards 1, 2, and 3, and different ways to try and accommodate the population shifts that we're seeing, because Ward 3 remained overpopulated, if you will, while Wards 1 and 2 were still underpopulated. So trying to see how best to shift, and those Ward 3 and 2 intersect with Villanova, which also intersected with that goal. I will also note that Eastern University campus, I did in all of the options unify that into one ward, although that ward changes between the different options that it's in. Okay, so this is one option to look at. It moved the fewest people you'll see in each option. I had noted that the number of people being moved into a new ward, and I estimated student. Obviously, the census data doesn't tell you, who's student and who's not, but I'm assuming if, a dorm's located there, it's likely mostly student population. So this moved the fewest number of people. So Ward 3 retained Villanova in this option, and then Ward 2 sort of shifts over into Ward 1 a little bit, and Ward 1 is shifting down into the top portion, the upper portion here of Ward 3. So that was one way to achieve that. It looks a little odd up here because this is where the polling locations are both located across the street from each other in Ward 3. So it was sort of impossible to bring Ward 1 into Ward 3 without eliminating one of the polling locations, but I did my best. So that's one option.
Just quick question. So
sure.
In that first option, Ward 7, does it still have Villanova students?
Yes. So it includes all of South Campus, and it includes the Commons. And I'm not sure of I should look at the paper. They probably speak better as to what's in there. I think the stadium's in there. I don't know if there's a label for that particular area. But as far as student housing goes, it would be the Commons and South Campus are there. And it currently has, I should say, in Ward 7, the Commons are currently located in Ward 7 under the current map and part of South Campus. So this would bring all of South Campus. So there's no longer students housed in Ward 4 and under any proposal.
So in this proposal, the students would be in Ward 7, Ward 3, and Ward 2?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And then can you explain in Ward 3, that little divide by Ward 4, with Ward 4, and then what's on the other side?
So yeah, this is one of those census block anomalies I mentioned earlier because of how they changed the census blocks between 2010 and this census. So this is connected by Lancaster Avenue, and if you I don't have a picture of it, but there's a census block that comes from here, and it goes because there used to be a census block that cut off at the metro line there, and it doesn't anymore, and now it extends all the way over here. It's about like 160 people or so. So if that's an issue, we can do an option that would pull in more people, but it disrupts a neighborhood, and this would be technically acceptable. Not ideal, but technically acceptable. So it is connected by Lancaster Avenue, and if you would pool those people there, then that means the Ward 4 still needs more people, and it'll need to move up into Ward 6, which means that then Ward 6 has to change its boundaries a little bit. And it didn't seem to me, because it wasn't legally necessary to change, it is contiguous as proposed, that while such a narrow point of connectivity is not ideal, it was better than the alternatives. So if that makes sense. That was the thinking behind that.
Is it okay to ask a question?
Why don't we finish your entire presentation, save your question? I just want you to be able to get the whole thing out.
Sure. I'll try to keep this high level. So then in option B, instead I decided, when I was drawing this version, I kept the upper portion of Ward 3 intact, which meant you had to move the lower portion, which contains a lot of densely populated area because that is on the Villanova campus. So the census blocks you're moving there are very large. I mean, there can be 1,000 people in one census block. So in that instance, it is still connected here with the Lancaster Avenue, and instead Ward 2 picked up more of Villanova University, and Ward 1 took Eastern University, and Ward 3 moved up into Ward 1 a little bit here. So that's how that one's a little bit different in the configuration there. And that moved the next largest number of people, although it's pretty close to the general population, it's more student population that's moving. And then the final option here is option C, which probably moves the most population, maybe like another 500 or so people of general population and quite a few more students. So this one tries to get all of Villanova into 2 wards. So Ward 2 has all except South Campus in this particular option. And so to achieve that, it meant that Ward 1, you'll see, stretches over here and picks up sort of the top portion, if you will, or the upper portion of Ward 2. And then Ward 3 has moved and almost picked up an entire voting precinct from I should say, Ward 3 moved in to pick almost an entire voting precinct from Ward 2 to accommodate that large of a population shift, if you will. So, but then that did achieve the goal of, reducing it to the fewest number of ward divisions. So that's sort of a high-level overview of sort of the interplay between the different options.
You said you wanted to keep this to a high level. I do not want to stop you. I know that there's at least 2 questions because I heard one and I have one.
That's all. That's my quick overview, if you will, of this, and I'm happy to delve deeper as questions arise.
Okay. Going to throw it open to the floor. You ask first.
I was curious, how do you figure out where the precinct lines are? Mike, sorry. How do you figure out where the precinct lines are? I have no clue.
So these are based off of, I'll show you the last page. These are actually based off of census blocks. So you can see here that the township's made up of hundreds of tiny little census blocks, and those census blocks are put together by the Board of Elections into voting precincts, and those are the polling place you go vote at. So everyone who goes and votes at the same polling place lives in the same voting precinct, and then those voting precincts are what make up the wards in the township. And that's what we're deciding what the boundaries are today.
So this is the way it is now?
Yes. Those are the outlines you're seeing are the ward boundaries. They're the darker outlines. But yes, there are also the polling places within there.
So I'm just curious, how do you know where to draw the precinct line?
That's been determined by the Board of Elections. They decide, and they determine that based on rules they have to follow related to like voting population and the number of voters. They're monitoring like lines at polling places and trying to ensure that everyone has easy access to be able to come out and vote. But as they're making changes to those, they're taking into account, they have to follow these census block lines when they're doing that. And they can't go outside of the ward. So like they have to stay within the ward. So once the ward lines are established, they may decide to make some modifications, based on, what the new.
Does the precinct have?
That's media.
The county seat.
The county seat, yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do they have to be contiguous, the precincts? Do you know? I know this isn't your bailiwick, but.
Yeah. I think it's preferable that they be contiguous. Yes, but I do know that Ward 2 is not contiguous at all, which is very, very odd. That is unusual. Normally they are contiguous, and it's certainly preferable, although I have seen it where polling places are not located within the place where they're voting. That happens too sometimes.
Do we have any additional questions? Ms. Winters, you just know that someone's going to yell Mike if you try and talk back there.
I was just going to ask how Cabrini and Eastern are treated in each of your 3 options. I know right now they're in 2 different wards. They're very much like communities, and Eastern was in fact divided into 2 different things because the 165th and 166th Pennsylvania legislative districts cut Eastern in 2 different groups, as it did Villanova.
So Eastern University is in the same district, meaning both parts that are currently divided are no longer divided in any of the proposals. But the 2 universities you mentioned up there are not always in the same district in the proposals. 'Cause that was the other part of your question, right?
Because they're like communities.
Yes. So they are not always in the same district in these. So like the one that you're seeing here in option C, they're in 2 different districts because this is Eastern University and here's the other university up here. I think one of them they are, though, in the same district. I think in one of them they were. Oh, option B, hang on, let me look and see if so,
That's B.
yeah, it was in B. So in option A, they're still in 2 different districts, but in option B, they are in the same district. Yep.
Do we have any additional questions?
I noticed there was no packet for this meeting. I don't know, I mean, this is a lot of work to put together and all that, and I was trying to type the redistricting URL in down there, and it didn't pull up the map. My interest was to go in and zoom in on some of the shapes and see other layers if they exist. So I guess my main question is, will these different proposals with a lot more detail and some layers that actually will help us identify which streets and neighborhoods these shapes are overlaying, will that be available to us soon, hopefully online?
Yes. So the concept was that we would give Ms. Holt an opportunity to present her maps before we just kind of threw them out to the public. We have a second meeting where we're going to do more or less the same presentation that we just saw, with the expectation that there will be less presenting by Ms. Holt and more feedback from the public, because you guys will have had the chance to engage with the maps and come up with some thoughts on your own. At the next meeting, what I would really like to be able to do is engaging with the census blocks that you see on the final page of the presentation, say to Ms. Holt, hey, you have, there's this one complete community, all of which is encompassed within your map except for one little tiny census block. Could we add it? And then where do we have to take away in order to make up for that, if we have to? And that kind of granular detail is what I imagine we'll be doing at the next meeting. In order to enable everybody to do that, we'll make these maps available. I just didn't want to throw this out to the public without Ms. Holt having at least the opportunity to explain what is not, to me, an intuitive process. Ms. Winters.
I was going to specifically request that those of you who are on this committee, who are commissioners, perhaps make a special request to send the maps with the details to the Historical Society to see if they see communities based on their experience that have in the past been parts of distinct groups or evolving groups of the future. Thanks.
Do we have any additional questions?
I can also talk a little bit about some of the anomalies with Villanova, if that is
Please.
of interest. I was delving into that.
Anomalies.
Little anomalies. So, I mean, the census does their best, okay? They're counting a lot of people. They really do try. But they just, there's a lot of people, and it's not 100% accurate. So some of the areas that are more in question, I kind of dove into a little bit, and this slide I kind of showed here shows how the counts can kind of change a little bit from census to census. So they redo their census blocks and try to improve them. Sometimes they are an improvement. Sometimes maybe we think the other way may have been better. So you can see here they clearly must have changed how they were counting here, because you can see there's 150 less people or so, or whatever that is, 160 less people between 2010 and 2020, and it's not because there was new buildings there or somebody tore down a building necessarily, but I think they changed which dorms were being counted within that particular census block. And the other one that was even stranger than this one is here with Lancaster Avenue and the Commons. So it's my understanding from what was presented that no students live right here in this area. And if I'm incorrect in that, looking at the map, there's no student halls here. And yet, you can see that's where they counted the people, because there's 1,289. Where the students actually live, based on what I saw from Villanova, is here, which is the Commons, and that's where all the student housing is, and yet this census block, according to the census, contains 9 people. So it just makes it kind of interesting. So when you take that into account and you look, for instance, at option B, while it would appear to me by the numbers that Villanova University students are in 3 wards here, in Ward 3, 2, and 7, in actuality, because they don't live here, but live over here, they would really be in 2 wards in this option with the student housing potentially. So that's just an interesting little thing. And because there's only 9 people in this little piece with the Commons, you can decide whether you want it in Ward 2, let's say, or Ward 7, if you're looking at this without significantly impacting the official census count, even though you're moving perhaps a significant number of people. You know you're moving a significant number of people because of where the student population lives. So like if you would move forward with this option or option C, for instance, South Campus would all be in Ward 7. So their first year, it's my understanding, they would be in Ward 7. And then once they move beyond their first year into other years, they would be in Ward 2 and would remain there if you moved the Commons there. And for the rest of their time at the university, they would, wherever the students live, they would be in Ward 2 under this particular configuration, or under option C, that would also be the case. So that's just something that's, I don't know, you could consider it a gift from the census maybe, depending on your perspective. But I just thought I would point that out. It was interesting to me. I had to do a double take when I was reviewing the information provided from Villanova, because I thought, wait a minute. But it appears like that is the case. And if I have misunderstood, feel free for someone to correct me now or afterwards, because I certainly am not as familiar with the campus as you all who actually live here. So
I suspect that at least 2 people are going to take these maps once we publish them and look at them in much greater detail for where the students are actually living.
yes. But I just thought that was worth noting.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
That clock is still slow. I have 7:59, so we have 1 minute left. Final comments by anybody? Seeing none, thank you all. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.